My name is Scott COMM. I'm a student at St. Cloud State University, and I am an American citizen in the sixth generation. But how did I get here? This is my story.
Runkey would have been here, John Runkey's family.
The U.S. in 1887 and initially settled in Watertown, Wisconsin.
My grandmother's family, to the best of my knowledge, came here in the middle 1800s, about 1850 something. My grandfather came here about 1900, to the best that I've been told.
My grandfather on my mother's side came here in the late 1800s, and my grandmother was born in Minnesota, and so they had met down in southern Minnesota, I think Winona actually, and were married in the late 1800s. I think my grandpa was born in 1862, and on my father's side, his grandfather, or his father was born in Michigan, and then moved to Le Sueur area down by Mankato, and I think they were farmers. They were looking for a place to own land. My father's parents, some of them, they farmed, and then my father became a butter maker, ice cream maker.
I think my grandfather on my dad's side came to Little Falls probably looking for work, and there was more than likely work in the sawmill. Weyerhaeuser and Musser had a big sawmill and pine tree lumber company in Little Falls. I think that's what brought them here. On my mother's side, I don't know. My great grandfather was killed, and my grandfather were both killed moving a house, and I really don't know much about what their history of my mother's side. My mother's father was born 6 weeks before she knew her father, and her mother died when she was 12. She was raised by her grandmother, but I very vague on my mother's side.
Okay, were they mostly?
My grandfather, I'm sure, was single when he moved here. He was born in South Dakota, and I think most of his family was out there yet at that time.
My grandfather was married when he moved here on my mother's side. They were living in Fairview, Montana, and they moved to Randall, Minnesota, and they moved with horses and wagon. It took them 6 weeks. My mother was 16, and she rode horseback from Montana to Randall, and like I say, it took 6 weeks for them to move, but they came here also to farm. No, my grandfather didn't. He never purchased land. He was kind of a rover. He moved from one rented farm to another, and did not do a good job of farming or probably anything else, the way it sounds.
On my dad's side, his grandparents came from Canada and bought land north of Little Falls. Actually ended up owning about 500 acres, mainly in the bluffs. Part of it was the bluffs north of Little Falls, where Chief Holden today's grave was, or is. At one time, that was part of their farm. But my grandfather and my dad never farmed. my dad was a sailor, spent almost 20 years in the Merchant Marines, and then after that he worked on the Great Lakes as a sailor. Most of his life he was a sailor. Why I started farming, I don't know. Something I wanted to do and did, I guess. I think my grandfather on my dad's side came here looking for work and then married a local girl, and that's why he stayed here.
My father moved down from Thief River Falls during the Prohibition. He had worked for Keewell's brewing company, which had made beer, and during the Prohibition, of course, they couldn't do that, so with their help, he moved from Thief River to Little Falls, and he became an ice cream manufacturer. And then after Prohibition was over with, then he owned the Sanitary Milk and Ice Cream Company in Little Falls, and bottled milk, made butter, and ice cream. And then he married a local girl. By then my mother was living here after she'd come from Montana, and they married and stayed in the family. And some of his, my dad's parents kind of moved wherever my dad went because he was crippled, and he had trouble walking, and so they always kind of followed Willie around. It was quite an impact because they made a lot of ice cream. They bottled milk, which was delivered to the houses at the time in glass bottles. And I can remember as a child, anytime there was a lot of baseball games on Sunday and different church picnics, my dad would have to deliver the ice cream out there because nobody had a freezer, so they had big insulated containers that they kept the cans in. He had quite a few employees that worked with him or for him, and I'd say he had a good impact on Little Falls.
He was the only, I think, ice cream manufacturer in
Little Falls
at any time.
Yes, yes.
Other than when Keewell shut down.
And the only one that made bottled milk. There was bottled pasteurized milk. There was York's Dairy that they sold unpasteurized milk, raw milk. And they did sell bottled milk, yeah.
So,
My relatives all stayed here. I've lived here all my life, and my relatives had stayed here.
Once my parents married, they stayed here till they died. I have a sister and two brothers, and I and my sister still lived here. My brothers, and they got out of high school, they moved to Pontiac, Michigan, to work with General Motors in the car manufacturing. I guess I'm still here.
Runke. That would be John's one son. Was a farmer. Walter's dad was a farmer. He was born November 24th, 1892, and died May 31st, 1950, at the age of 57. His wife died in March 1936 at the age of 41.
My mother's mother. When Grandpa came to America, he came alone in 1910. But then, and he left Grandma and the four children back in Denmark, where they live. And then when he came to America to look for work and a place to live, area to live, then he sent for Grandma and the children. She was supposed to come with him. Then he came in 1910, and my grandmother was scheduled to be on the Titanic ocean liner for 1912. But when it came down to the time, by the time her name came on the list, they were already booked. They couldn't take any more passengers. So she came the year before, 1911, and missed coming on the Titanic. That is how close we came to not even being in existence of our family, because our mother was 9 months old, and they would have all drowned in the ocean with the Titanic.
So basically, that's how they came to be over here. Um, were they able to meet up with the family right away?
I imagined he was. He had found work and a place to live in this area, in the Hutchinson area. He wanted to be a farmer. That's what he was, and he did. They did live in Hutchinson in the later years of their married life. No, he was a farmer, laborer all his life, and he had 4 children or 4 sons. And Daniel Getz, he was a farmer labor helper on various farms in the Collins Township area. That's where Grandma and Grandpa lived first. Mm-hmm. And then I don't know how him and Mom met, maybe at a dance or somewhere like that. And then when they got married, then they started out, well, first year they went where his mother lived. Well, Dad found out he wasn't going to live there very long, so then they came back to Minnesota, and then he started going to school out there. And then when I was 18 years of age, then I got to work at the 3M company, that's Scotch State, Minnesota Mining. I worked there for 5 years, me and a schoolmate of mine. We shared a room. And we always had to walk downtown for all our meals. We only had a room, we didn't have a cooking facility. And then when Walter got out of the service, well, then I met him, and that didn't take long, and we got married. That was the end of my career in Hutchinson, and after that I was just a farmer's wife for the rest of my life.
My family was, we lived with my dad's family, and there was 2 aunts and 2 uncles that never married, and so we had the home place, which was the farm that when they came over to America, they settled, and that was the home place. We started out when I was a kid. We all lived there in a house. It was kind of a duplex with a shared bathroom.